Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Did you want to shut the door, leave it open?
Leave it open in case people come in.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, well, this is John Champagne from Barron, and he's going to talk to you about a new project that we're going to be doing this fall in his class.
I have to preface my talk by telling you that I am somewhat critical of our administration in this talk. But this comes to you.
Should we turn the recording off?
Yeah. But this comes to you as somebody who has been at Penn State for 20 years, clearly is invested in being at Penn State and seeing our resources improve. So I hope you'll keep that in mind, and no one in this room is going to be offended. I have no idea who's watching us. Okay, and normally when I teach, I don't prepare. I discuss with my students, but when I speak in public, I always read from a script. So, so I hope you won't be distracted by the kind of formality of reading from a script. The digital humanities is clearly upon us. Its praises being sung from the 4 virtual corners of the globe, and our dreams increasingly haunted by both its promises and perils. Unfortunately, DH is being embraced by some administrators as a way to finally bring the humanities into the fold of neoliberalism. Such administrators hope to ensure that the research we produce in the humanities is rendered useful to the processes of capitalist accumulation, what a fully instrumentalized understanding of knowledge calls relevant. Meanwhile, the very week after a radio appearance in which he announced to the world Penn State Erie's new Digital Media Art Center initiative, our chancellor suspended the search for 2 of the 3 faculty positions upon which this literally virtual initiative depends. In characteristic fashion, some of you might recall, for example, the first-year seminar experiment, to which I will soon return, we are expected to provide fresh and innovative programs to recruit and retain more students, but given no additional resources with which to do so. Yet, as an English professor, I also believe that the so-called digital revolution is analogous to the invention of the printing press, and that we do our students a great disservice by not providing them with access to the new forms of reading and writing it has engendered. Given in particular the nuanced understanding of literacy that composition studies as a field has developed over the last 30 years, the responsibility for providing students with some of the tools with which to construct and analyze digital texts seems naturally to fall to those of us who regularly teach the composition sequence at Penn State, which includes English 15, the first-year composition, English 30, honors composition, and 202, the writing and the disciplines in particular. And of course, there is no necessary reason why digital documents cannot perform what is understood by at least some of its practitioners as the humanities' traditional role of the interrogation and even critique of that large umbrella term, culture. If ethics today still means to not be at home in one's house, the digital humanities can in fact be harnessed to such a project, troubling our established ways of understanding what it means to compose, distribute, and read texts. As I myself did not learn how to use a word processor until graduate school, my own embracing of digital technology has been gradual and tentative. I am still much more comfortable with a blackboard and a piece of chalk than a PowerPoint presentation. But several years ago, I introduced into my English 30 honors composition class a final group assignment, a digital document constructed in response to one of the texts we had read earlier in the semester, John Berger's Ways of Seeing. Given the arguments that this particular book makes about what it refers to as what it then called the new language of images, and their potential to allow us to think critically about our current way of life, such an assignment seemed to grow naturally out of our initial efforts to respond to the gambit proposed by Berger's book. That is, on some level, a rich and engaged reading of Berger demands that we as readers produce a response that brings together words and images. What, via some 40 years plus after Berger's own initial foray in this direction, is the appropriate technology, digital media. And some of you may be old enough to recall, maybe not, that this essay was originally produced as both a book and a television show. So I want to talk a little bit about what I do in my composition classes and how this fits into the larger picture. At Barron, like all of our composition courses, English 30 concentrates on teaching students how to write academic essays. Specifically, we ask students to read what are often admittedly difficult texts, in most cases, the texts that we ourselves use in our research. I, in fact, use them in my research, and then construct an argument in relation to those texts, an argument that allows the student to add his or her voice to an extended intellectual conversation. This allows us to emphasize the practices of close reading and engaged writing. Normally, students read an example of a scholarly essay. In English 30, we include book-length essays. It's one of the differences between 15 and 30 is this book-length essay project. And then try to cull a methodology from the essay that they can then apply to a new context, one of their own choosing. This allows them both to test, refine, and even critique the methodology proffered by the essays we read, and then to produce new knowledge by bringing this methodology to a fresh context, ideally the two working in tandem with one another. While we hope to avoid a mechanistic application of methodology, even this on some level prepares students for the kind of work they will be doing in their other courses, because there is no academic essay that does not cite the words of an established expert and then engage in some kind of dialogue with that expert. The very first digitally based assignment I ever required my students to complete was one grounded in a reading of the printed version of this book. An early example of intermodal composition that relied heavily on an aesthetic of sampling, Berger's book includes written essays accompanied by photos, photo essays constructed of images culled from advertising and oil paintings, with no commentary, just the photographs, and collages combining words and images. Given that it was also a television show, Ways of Seeing provides us with a great early model of humanities-based public scholarship. In addition to its efforts to disseminate its insights beyond a small audience of experts, Berger's project was both an example of collaborative composition, in that it was a television show, and of course most TV shows are collective efforts, and an attempt to redeploy what he called at that time techniques of mechanical reproduction in the spirit of philosopher Walter Benjamin's essay, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, that's Benjamin, and its dialectical response to what in Benjamin's time were new forms of media like photography and film. And so this is an example of the kind of new ways Hartfield imagined. You can imagine he had to get out of Germany eventually. Like Benjamin before him, John Berger saw in these new techniques both the dangers they presented to thinking historically, represented by advertising in particular, and their potential to engage readers in an attempt to understand their own status as historical beings capable of intervening in, rather than simply being the victim of, larger networks of power and knowledge production. The book is a compelling rumination on the history of Western visual culture, the complex relationship of words to images, the so-called gendering of the gaze, collage as a critical aesthetic, and the untapped potential of new technologies to be harnessed in the service of critical thinking and cultural critique. The Berger assignment that I gave my students actually consisted of two parts. One, a more traditional written document, the other, a digital response. The first assignment was fairly straightforward. Apply Berger's understanding of advertising to an ad of your own choosing. To contextualize briefly this assignment, prior to reading Berger, students read a variety of different interdisciplinary approaches to the study of culture. And that's how I imagine my English 30 class, as a class that tries to introduce students to a kind of cross-disciplinary study of culture. We begin our work with Emanuel Wallerstein's, he calls it a unidisciplinary approach to the study of capitalism as a world system, the social relations, both global and local, it requires, and its political consequences. We then move to Richard Dyer's Entertainment and Utopia, which, as one would conclude from its title, focuses on the utopian aspects of entertainment, as it tries, like myth, to provide imaginary solutions to the real problems of scarcity, fragmentation, mystification, emotional numbness, and fatigue engendered by capitalism. Next, students read Kabina Mercer's essay, Black Hair, Style Politics, an essay that examines African American and British hairstyles as forms of cultural expression whose politics can only be understood through an examination of the specific historical circumstances of their creation. It is at this point then in the course that students read Berger and his critique of advertising, specifically the way that it promotes a widely shared sense of envy, a dissatisfaction with one's personal life rather than the larger social forces that contribute to that dissatisfaction, and historical amnesia. Following a brief intermission in which students read Edward Said's Covering Islam, and then puts its account of media representations of Islam in dialogue with the story they have chosen from an anthology of recent Arab American fiction, students once more take up Berger. The final group project asks students simply to take on the challenge posed in the concluding section of Berger's first essay, In Ways of Seeing. If the new language of images were used differently, in effect differently from advertising, for example, it would, through its use, confer a new kind of power. Within it, we could begin to define our experiences more precisely in areas where words are inadequate.
If I could interrupt, how is that different from a public service announcement?
If you look at the book project is about how a lot of advertising in particular tries to dehistoricize things. It really isn't that different from a public service announcement. That is a possible outcome, right? The way that I've structured the assignment is very open, right? Just try to imagine an alternative to advertising, and specifically the things he talks about that advertising promotes in terms of imagining that you're changing the world by consuming things instead of changing the world, the kind of historical amnesia that, like in the ad we saw, the historical amnesia of Western colonialism that the previous ad relied on. The last week of the semester was taken up with in-class presentations where the students presented to us as a class their projects and critique, which largely was provided by me because students were shy. They're not that used to examining digital responses. Because the assignment came at the end of the course, I had no opportunity to see drafts prior to the class presentation. Also, the groups were constructed randomly. For example, according to the students' astrological signs. As I discovered, when it comes to digital technologies, our students possess wildly varying levels of skill, in part the product of the different high schools from which they came and the accompanying resources, or lack thereof, the various high schools possessed. And here's a table on child poverty in our area. The success of the group project thus seemed to rely a great deal on the luck of the draw, which ultimately struck me as unfair. Additionally, some of the students produced a version of My Worst Nightmare, a digital document that, largely owing to the students' unfamiliarity with thinking about how their visual essays might be read by a scholarly audience, offered a pretty grotesque misreading of Berger's argument. I don't know how well you can see that. As I explained to the students, if they seriously were attempting to draw some kind of equation, as dubious as it might be, between these various figures, and in fact, certain critiques of the personal lives of Gandhi and King had been raised in the public media, that might have been an interesting project, but the comparison between Charles Manson and Adolf Hitler on the one hand and Gandhi and King on the other was not likely to be convincing to many readers, never mind the political implications of such a comparison. Unfortunately, it reproduces what I call I'm blanking on the name of the television show because I hate it so much. The TV show cartoon that makes fun of everything.
South Park.
No, South Park I actually think has some kind of political critique. Family Guy. This kind of, because everything is able to be critiqued, everything should be critiqued, and there's no difference. Also, what I found unfortunate was that the spontaneous nature of my critique, because I didn't see drafts ahead of time, unfortunately resulted in a certain lack of tact on my part that I ultimately felt was not particularly productive. Given these limitations, I temporarily dropped the assignment from my English 30 syllabus. Fast forward several years, given the mandate from the Center County campus, which is how we refer to University Park,
I love it.
that we invent and implement a new required 1 to 3 credit first-year seminar. And I don't know if out of our faculty senate came this requirement that all campuses shall give first-year seminars. Our upper administration at the time opted for a 1-credit course that was supposed to introduce students to everything from the rigors of intellectual life to the mental health counseling services available on campus. Given that our colleagues in business in particular were, in spite of the letter of the course description, using the seminar primarily to introduce students to the business school and its various majors, in the humanities and social sciences, we eventually opted to try and use the seminar to introduce students to what it meant to do intellectual work across our fields. Okay? That is, we tried to come up with an intellectually rigorous, cross-disciplinary course. I've had the opportunity to teach Philosophy 014, the philosophy of love and sex, and given the popularity of that course with students, I designed a 1-credit first-year seminar on the topic. This course borrowed some of the readings from my English 30 class that I've already introduced to you, including Berger and Dyer. Given the seminar's goals, it seemed the most appropriate place to introduce students to a digital assignment, as it theoretically might remedy this digital divide, given that everyone has to take a first-year seminar. For the first time in my career, I made use of the technology of a class blog, specifically to foster additional discussion of the readings and students' written responses to them, which, given the nature of the course, took the form not of full-fledged academic essays, because it was in fact a 1-credit course, but rather answers to questions I posed or even outlines for potential future essays. So I don't know if you can see here, these are the assignments, many of which, again, rather than being essay responses to the readings, were outline responses for a future essay. For their final seminar project, students had the option of either creating an anti-ad, public service announcement, right? One that responded visually to Berger's critique of advertising, or a visual essay that applied the theoretical framework Dyer established to a work of entertainment of their own choosing, testing Dyer's model and its account of how entertainment works against, testing Dyer's model against their chosen form of entertainment, which could be anything whatsoever, right? From sports to computer games, whatever the students felt they had a certain stake in. In both cases, then, students were doing what we always do in the course, taking something they had read in one place and extending it into an argument of their own, but this time an argument made in digital media. Again, a skill that I assumed students would increasingly need in all of their classes. To receive an A in the class, all students had to do was to complete the assignment. Given the experiences garnered from my previous experience of teaching English 30, I invited Nick Smirker, one of PSU's Media Commons traveling media consultants, to come to Barrington to introduce students to the flip cameras and iMovie software that the campus possessed. Now, you all are well aware of these resources, but I also gave this talk this morning to some of my colleagues in English, and they might not have been. Unfortunately, the majority of students failed the class, simply because they did not complete the assignment. While PSU has a variety of resources available, including Nick, the call-in center that I'm sure you're well aware of, and our extensive and great Linda tutorials, we at Penn State Erie lack a single staff member whose dedicated job is assisting students in the use of the modest digital technology we possess. In fact, we have something worse, a variety of staff members who point fingers at one another for this failure. Basically, our librarians who are willing to help people but have no training, right? And our CMC, Copy Multimedia Center, who say, I don't want to do that. I learned Photoshop, that's the end. Here, however, is what I considered one of my successful efforts. If you want to see it again, Champagne Popify is my YouTube channel, where both this successful and some of my less successful ones are also posted. But again, I gave them all an A because they finished the project. This year, I am returning to the earlier English 30 assignment I spoke about. The difference is that I have moved the first Berger assignment, the one in which they write, to earlier in the semester. Students will be assigned the group project far in advance of the last week of class. Nick will be coming up to Barron in October, and he has generously agreed to view and comment upon student drafts, for which I'm providing a deadline also well in advance of the end of the semester. And there's the assignment. Again, it basically just says, come up with some kind of movie that responds to Berger's proposal. When, in anticipation of potential problems students might encounter in completing the assignment, I notified our 3 campus administrators, our highest campus administrators, of our lack of staff. They forwarded the notification on to my school director, as if this was a problem chiefly for students in the humanities and social sciences. And this may be. My partner, who has an MIS degree from PSU, told me that in business, students are simply told, go read the manual and figure it out. While given his gift of hyperbole, this is probably an exaggeration. It still suggests that humanities students may need a particular kind of guidance in using digital media that business and engineering students do not. In any case, my well-meaning school director responded by telling me that there were certainly a few junior faculty who would probably be delighted to help me. Obviously, as a full professor, I'm certainly not going to lean on my junior colleagues for assistance. Another colleague who has a penchant for rewriting staff people's job descriptions without their knowledge or input suggested that I bring into class our extremely knowledgeable and generous teaching technology staff. And I am not being sarcastic here. We have an A1 teaching technology staff. They helped me construct the very first online course I did this past summer. But I was not going to appropriate them as my students' personal tutors. In light of our Chancellor's recent digital initiatives, I have opened up a discussion with my colleagues in composition concerning the inclusion of more digital assignments in our course. Facing the big stick of the core council letters, and I'm not sure if you're all aware of what those were.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We are trying to imagine ways in which to attract more students to the humanities and social sciences majors in particular. Despite the large number of credit hours we teach in the humanities and social sciences that are the result of our gen ed responsibilities, our under-enrolled majors are considered a financial burden. And our chancellor has told us that if our numbers do not improve, he will start reallocating vacated faculty lines to other schools. As in his opinion, general education courses do not need to be taught by tenured faculty. Also, he will not allow the School of Humanities and Social Sciences to advertise any job that does not include digital humanities in the description. We currently have 3 unfilled tenure track lines, one in history, one in English, and communications. And as I told you, he took 2 of those lines back without explanation. He's recently given us permission to advertise 1 open rank search, a digital humanities line that will go either to English or history. The idea being whoever is the most qualified person, but of course it pits the 2 programs against each other. My initial proposal to my composition colleagues was to include some form of digital document in the required assignments for English 15, preferably one that combined images, either moving or still, words, and sound, so that students would have that experience. My idea was to market Barron as a college that would seek to close up the digital divide in our part of Western Pennsylvania. My sense was that faculty would not be responsible for providing the training, but rather with teaching students how to evaluate the finished product. I have to tell you honestly that when I said this to some of my colleagues, they said, "Oh, parents don't care. Why would that attract parents? Why would that have parents wanting to?" The same thing with having full professors teach this course. The attitude was, "Oh, parents don't have any idea what a full professor is. What difference does it make?" Anyway, clearly there is a precedence for teaching students how to read, but not how to create, right? While art and cinema historians usually know something about the technology, they do not generally assume that before they can study Luca Signorelli. For example, they have to know how to paint. That's the last judgment. It's kind of appropriate. Meanwhile, another colleague of mine is in fact spearheading a project to provide summer training to faculty who do want to learn how to use certain software packages. However, composition faculty legitimately feared that many of our students are already lacking in the necessary skills required to write and read traditional academic essays. And while many professors already use Angel, Blogs, and Yammer, they are reluctant to have to learn yet another digital application. So that was the English 15 courses. But the 202A and B classes, writing in the humanities and writing in the social sciences, seem an appropriate place in which we might begin to require at least one digital essay. There is already a precedence for this in absolutely students in tech writing and business writing are required to create digital documents, and have been for some time, digital portfolios, for example. Because we offer fewer sections of 2A and B than C and D, a faculty member who didn't want to include a digital essay could simply teach a different composition course. So we wouldn't feel as if we were insisting that faculty, we didn't want resistance right from the beginning from faculty who said, I can't do this, I'm too old. In addition to the concerns already raised, I want to close by adding one more. The difficulty of retaining faculty who do already possess the necessary digital skills and intelligence to assist in the growth of this digital humanities program that is virtual right now. For the reason we in English have a vacant faculty line is precisely that we were able to recruit a very talented young scholar in digital humanities and British literature who left us for greener pastures after a year. While some of my colleagues think we were simply played by our former digital hire, the fact remains that she was part of a dual academic career couple. And despite PSU's alleged policy to retain such couples, that policy is applied in uneven ways. And again, to use my own personal experience, which people might find a little bit tasteless, but my own partner is currently working as an administrative assistant. Given that he has his MIS degree from Penn State, he is frequently called upon by faculty to do everything from PowerPoints to syncing their home and email computers to teaching them how to use their iBook. However, his salary is half of what someone with an MIS degree would typically make, as he's starting at administrator. It's roughly $29,000. Unfortunately, concerning the spousal hire, it is often the case that at Penn State, at least at my campus, we don't even offer someone a one-year position until the partner already has a competing offer. And by that point, the faculty person already feels undervalued. Right? If I came here with a partner and you didn't offer that person a job, and now suddenly that I'm leaving, you have a job available, what happened? Combined with the fact that, again, as part of this whole core council process, our FTM positions are being reconfigured. We used to be able to offer people 3-year, 5-year, 5-year for basically having a permanent career at Penn State. Now we're being told 1 year, 2 year, those kinds of positions. Because everybody is so afraid that they will need this flexibility. So again, the future of digital humanities at Penn State Erie does not look particularly bright, and in implicitly encouraging my composition colleagues to include a however modest digital assignment. I'm well aware of this long-term tendency to ask faculty to do more with less, to not provide release time to learn new skills, things like that. However, as people who are generally drawn to our field because we believe in the power of text to literally change people's lives, including our own, my sense is that owing to a combination of our savior complexes and our sincere belief in the necessity of digital literacy, we will, as humanists, take on this challenge. As for how to make PSU a more welcoming place for curricular innovation, digital or otherwise, despite our own university-centered documents that state that curricular changes are to be initiated by faculty and overruled by administrators exclusively for reasons of cost, we unfortunately, as a faculty, seem increasingly to have ceded to administrators the power to determine curriculum. It's not only our Senate guidelines, it's our Middle States accreditation, which says really clearly faculty and qualified persons are to be involved in curricular change. In evidence, I would submit these core council letters with their demands that we develop either four-year majors that lead directly to employment, whether or not liberal arts students want those, or regardless of their value, majors with high student demand. And the P3 process, whereby faculty are literally able to wake up one day to find that, despite a lack of any consultation, their program now houses a new major to which new lines have been assigned. There's ours. We have an elementary education faculty that our Senate are not even our faculty senate, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences never voted on. And despite our having 2 lines withdrawn from digital humanities, we have 2 positions in education we're advertising this. In response to these abuses of administrative power, besides the fact that I think our Senate has to start speaking up, I would suggest joining our new local chapter of the AAUP. Thanks.
John, I'm curious. So between the 2 courses, the traditional composition and the digital version of it, what's the enrollment of students like enrollment or?
You know, I'm doing this completely on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And English 30 is always generally smaller. In part because we offer 2 sections and we don't attract that many students who test into the honors class. So my honors class this semester has 13 students in it. Most sections of English 30 have 24 students. Only after a long battle. For years we had 25 students, despite the fact that English 15 here had a lower enrollment. And we also, you know, again, we offer so many sections of this class that if people, if 15 sections of 25 students all get a digital assignment and there is no staff person, it will be pandemonium.
So this is Gen Ed, right?
Yeah.
Did you send out the letter?
Could
Did you send out the letter?
To
whoever.
Well, I'm making as much noise as possible on my campus. Because, I mean, it's, you know, part of it is that what I've also seen is that as full professors, we don't often take the opportunity that we should to say, look, I've been here 20 years, I know how this works, I know what our students need. Presumably you know that too, or you wouldn't have promoted me. I mean, you know that I know. So I'm just trying to make as much noise as I can. And hopefully, at the end of the semester, have some better examples that I can share with my colleagues, tell them more about Nick.
Have you talked to Chris Long?
Chris
Long?
No.
Associate Dean in College of Liberal Arts here. He's very much in support of digital.
See, part of the problem is that Barron is its own college.
Oh.
Maybe you could. Well, yeah, there might be some. There might, but this is what's so strange is that we are being told that we are investing in a digital arts media building, and then these lines are taken. I can't figure out the calculus.
Does that have to do with the new arts management major, you think?
Well,
so I hadn't heard about the new digital building.
It's you know, it's so far on paper and going to go into our strategic plan. But again, without a commitment of faculty lines, I don't know how this is going to happen. And staff to train us. Plus the fact that, unfortunately, many administrators, I understand that the term digital humanities can mean many different things, but most administrators, okay, that's not fair, many hear the phrase and say yes, because virtually every English job today includes something about digital humanities. So we all know we need it, even if we don't know what it is. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I didn't realize my talk was so long. But if anybody wants to email me, or I'd be more than happy.
Would like to. I think one. So the portfolio that your students can.
Yes.
I think
Yeah, you're
one
here for the next round.
And he has very
much
digitally very focused. So his students work.
Good.
Okay, moving to the other room.